Okay. This is actually take two because the first time the recording file got corrupted somehow. I do not know, but let's do it again and let's do it quick. So the request is for a little, the basics of creating hair in Cinema 4D and Redshift. So I've got this character I created in class. And the whole idea here was a way of creating characters using what I think is a really cool workflow of the volume mesher and builder. So you can see I'm just using capsules and spheres and things like that to make this organic shape. and that by itself would be kind of a mess if we're not for the remesh option in Cinema 4D, which will output a really clean topology if needed. So anyways, I mention this because what we're seeing on the screen right now is this. I did this as like the remesh, so let's call it base head, and I'm using a subdivision surface for the final rendering. Actually, I don't really need that. I've decided to use the Redshift tag. But really, this is too many polygons for what I need. And what I need is basically a hair helmet. When we create a hair object in Cinema 4D, we need to attach it to some geometry, right? And the hair will be spawned from that. I do not want to spawn hair from this cartoon character's cheeks or around its mouth or anything, which just be a waste, right? We just want the hair where we need it. And a good way to do that would be to just go into the remesh. So if I in fact, I had it set the density at 8, and that's how I got 8% of the total density of the volume mesher. So in this case, I want to do something even lower. And again, because I did this and it crashed, in that one I went with 2%, and that worked out pretty good. So let me hide the base head here, right? And I guess we can hide the eyes, maybe. Just leave that. I'm going to hide all the things. I don't need to see them in the viewport, but I'll just take a look at them in the render. So I'm going to turn the remesh back on, and let's make it visible. Right, and you can see here I'm getting, this would be too much right down by the mouth. I would need more density. But for the hair helmet, let's get to our default. See, I just need, I need the polygons to go around the ear here. I want it to kind of follow as if there's going to be like a little sideburn. And then this is going to come up along the top. So that works just fine for me. So again, this is a remesh object, really. So I need it to be a raw polygon object where I can select and delete the polygons I need and don't need. So I'm going to right click and current state to object. And it puts a bunch of junk down below. But here's that mesh object, and I'm going to just hide everything. Right, so here's my geometry. Let's go along and it's totally up to you. Oh, and I've turned on the symmetry tool here so that if I come over and make a selection, in fact, I'm going to use the brush, right? If I make selections here, it will start to get rid of polygons that do not need. Okay, so I've selected those. I'm just going to hit delete, and you can see what I've done is separate those two. So now if I use the move tool and just double click, it will select all the polygons that are connected to that one, is that polygon island, and I'll delete that there. And I'm just, again, going to go along with the brush tool, and I think this is where I want to, yeah, so this is going to be my hairline. Oops, and I'm going to hold down the shift key. Okay. So now, if I delete those, you can see I have a few little islands still there. Again, if I just double click and I'm holding down the shift key. So it will only select the ones connected. Okay, so let's take a look. Maybe, I probably don't want, I don't want this loop here. In fact, let's get rid of those two right there. All right, let us evaluate our hair helmet by making the base mesh visible. And might be hard to see in the screen capture, but in fact, if I just select all the polygons, you can kind of see where they're running along there. Okay, so I think that's pretty good. There are a few places maybe that I would want to make a tweak. Like I think the hairline comes a little close to this ear, and I want a little more of a receding hairline. So with this, and let's call this scalp. I'm going to turn on the snapping, which is the little magnet, and if I click on the gear next to it, just these are the settings I'm using. So snapping's on, I'm using the 3D snap mode, and I told it to snap to polygons. That works well for me. And with the move tool and in point mode, and with the symmetry on, so that if I make any changes here, it's going to be reflected over here, right? Or vice versa. So I'm going to pull these forward just a little bit because I want my character to have a little bit of a receding hairline. I'll pull this. And again, it's staying on that surface, and it doesn't have to be perfect. We just want to keep it very close as far as the growth of the hair. But here, as I mentioned, I don't like it too close to that ear. And we'll just tweak that little sideburn thing a little bit. Maybe this all comes down here. All right, so that's good enough for what we're gonna do. Can't help myself, gotta tweak a little bit. Okay, all right, so that gives me geometry. It's a nice place. Let's turn off the snapping. Okay. All right, so the first order of business is to create a piece of geometry that's going to be where the hair is going to grow from, right? So we have that there. And again, it doesn't have to be high resolution. At the end of the day, we're going to hide this in the render so that we don't need to see that. We just need it to exist so the hair can grow out of it. Okay, so let's go into object mode, make sure the scalp is active. And we're going to go up to simulate, and this is where we add the hair. So the hair objects, there's different types, but we're going to add hair. And you can see I get this blue fro wig thing going on, right? A couple other things that happen. So it created a hair object. The hair object has a material tag, which references a new hair material that was created. So let's go back to the hair object first. You can see it's down in the attributes, it's selected here. We have basic coordinates in that, but then we have the guides and the hair. There's a bunch of other stuff here. I'm going to turn off the dynamics. So I don't need the hair, I'm not animating it, right? So doesn't need to bounce in the wind or anything. And there's all these other commands here. We're not even going to worry about it. Really, we just want to worry about the guides and the hairs. So the guides are the blue things that you see here. That's not actually, those aren't going to render. Those are just guides, right? They're telling the hair, hey, kind of point in this direction. And then the hairs, and there's the other thing too, is the guides were spawned wherever there was a point on the geometry. You don't have to do that. You could turn it down to say 100 so you could have fewer guides because maybe you don't need that much styling, right? But when we start combing and brushing the hair, we need to have whatever's probably an appropriate amount to scale it, but we don't want to have too much to deal with, right? It'll become a pain. The segments, just these are like it's just a line, right? That has 8 segments, so it has they have points in them. I'll just leave that as the default. The hairs is actually what would render. Right now it's set to be 50,000. In this case, that would probably be enough. If you were doing a big, giant, cuddly, furry bear in the entire body, you would probably need more than that. And the segments, again, is just how smooth those segments of the hair are. we'll leave it at the defaults for now. Okay. So the hair material, if I click on that, and we go to its basic tab, there's actually, there's a bunch of settings here. We can change its, whatever the color would be, or the specular, the thickness. But we can also turn on things like kink and clump and things like this. So let's just turn on the IPR very quickly. Hope that this does not crash. So you can see the guides are pointing straight, so all the hair is pointing straight, right? It's also lit up from the light like a Christmas tree. I'll explain why in a second. And as I do this, I'm going to save repeatedly so it doesn't crash on me, hopefully. But if you, let's say if I just turn on frizz. So you can see the guides themselves have not been changed. But the hair has started to do something different and frizz out a little bit. So again, I'm going to turn that off. And let's turn on the kink. Right, so you can see the hair is doing, excuse me, the hair is doing a lot here. So this is kind of in the material a procedural way to add noisiness, jitter, right, to the hair itself. And then the guides would be a way for us to specifically style it. Okay, so let's turn off that part. The one thing I would say, you can see the hair is actually, it shows up as white. Well, the color of the hair is actually brown, according to this gradient. I'm going to double click on this, and I'm going to make it, I want something that's kind of gray. I don't want this brown color. So I'm just clicking on the color, and I'm just going to eliminate any of the, or most of the color value, right? But the thing that is making the hair really white is this specular. So it's like a highlight, and we also, our hair is really thick right now. We'll address that in a second. But I'm just going to make the strength really low for now. And let's go back to the redshift. Right, so you can see I'm now getting more gray hair without like this kind of uber shiny highlight on it. So this has just been my experience. Others might feel differently, but so there's a start. Okay. And I'm just saving on my keyboard as we go along. All right, so we've created a hair helmet. We've generated some hair. We've looked at the hair material where there's a few things that we can modify. We'll come back to that in a second. But now what we need to do is kind of style it, right? These guides are just pointing straight up, and some of them are really long. In fact, let's go back to the, if we go to the hair item, the guides right here, it says that it's, there's 250 and the length is 100. In fact, I'll just leave that there. And I'm going to do all my styling in, yeah, so look here. Let's turn, there is a symmetry function in the guides. I've never really used this, so let's see how well this works. My wife is the best, by the way. She just handed me a cough drop. Okay. So hopefully as I'm, the YZ plane would be like, here's the Y and then the Z, right? If I'm looking directly from the side. Okay. So, let me turn that on. And with the hair object selected, let's go to simulate where we created the hair. But we're going to go down to tools, and there is a brush. Okay, so the brush, it has a radius, like that's how big the brush is, right? As you can see, it's bigger or smaller. There's some other functions. I don't do much of this, so I haven't spent much time with this. But the mode is the type of brush down here. So right now it's set to be move. So if I wanted to, you could see I can. And now you can start to see how the segments function, right? You can see 1, 2, 3, as I start to drag these points around. And because I have really long hair, I need a big brush, right? To kind of do some styling. And I would recommend that, like using a big brush at the beginning. The hair coming out here on the sideburns, that's just too long. So let's change the mode of brush. So instead of move or twist or repel or kink, let's try scale. So, and I'm also going to turn down my brush size. All right, so for these here, you can see they're highlighted and they're getting longer. And what is happening is the scale works in the positive, but with most of the brushes in any sculpting app or something like this, if you hold down the control key, it will do the opposite. So instead of scaling in the positive, it will scale in the negative. Right, so I'm just gonna bring these down. I'm gonna bring these down here just a little bit. Oh, interesting. The scale did not work very well over here. Okay, let's pull these down. Maybe shorten a few of these. Okay, so let's try now with the move. There's a linear, there's all kinds of, it's like the brush head, like where it's sensitive or not. I'll just leave it at linear for this purpose of this tutorial. I'm just kind of pushing that back in here for whatever reason. I comb it over the ears a little bit. Just kind of creating some sweeping hair a little bit. And like I said, I don't really do this that much, but you can see if I use the straighten, in fact, let's turn that. Right, I can straighten it a little bit just to get it off of the scalp a little bit. There we go. So it takes a while, right? If it takes you a while to do your hair in the morning with the blow dryer and everything, just think how long it might take if you're using a virtual puppet and a virtual comb. The hair is really long here. There are some other tools where you can kind of like grab the tip of the hair and yank it back. I'm not going to get into all that stuff. Okay, let's go back to our Redshift camera and let's save. All right, that's pretty groovy. I'm just going to leave it like that it's like some 1980s Albert Einstein meets Richard Marx kind of thing. Okay, so let me turn that off. How am I doing on time? All right. So let's get in close here, and I'm going to bring up the Redshift render viewer. And this is from the previous tutorial. Oh, you know what I did? I moved the wrong camera. Okay, let's pause that for a second. Let me turn off the depth of field for the Redshift camera. Okay, so as we look at this, you can see the hair is a little, it's okay, right? One, you can see where it has all these kinks in it, and it's also pretty thick in here. So let's go back. Let's stop any of the rendering. I'm going to dock this in here. Okay, so let's go back to the hair object. Let's go to the hair material first, and let's go to the thickness. And the default is 1 centimeter to the tip. It gets thinner as it goes along there, right? So I'm going to make this actually 0.1 and 0.001. No, 0.01. All right, let's try that again. Okay, So that looks better. It might be just a little thin. Like it maybe is a little, so let's try 0.25 to 0.025. Okay, that looks better to me. So I'm getting a lot of hair. It's got a lot of frizz and stuff going on, but it's got these kinks that are in it. And that's, I've added frizz and some of these other things. So let's go back to the hair object and just keep in mind that the hairs have so many segments, right? And you don't want to put this to 1,000,000 because you're trying to keep them all. You don't want to have too much level of detail. Will crank your render times. But I do need this to smooth out a little bit. So I'm going to go just little bits at a time. And we should see that the hair now is flowing and there's less kinkiness, but there's a few in there. Right, so this is just upping the resolution of that hair line. And if it has a bunch of noise to it, right, it's got kinks and frizz and all that other stuff. All right, so that seems okay to me. I'll turn that off. Let's go back to the viewport and let's set it up so we can see our crazy creation. Excuse me. This cold is driving me crazy. All right, I turned on my Redshift camera again with its depth of field because that's the way I roll. Okay, so let's do a full quality render. And it's hair, right? And there's 50,000 of them. So it's going to add to your render time, as you would imagine. And again, this is not my area of expertise, so this is not, I would not call this perfect or anything. There's someone that knows a lot more than me would give lots of additional advice. But you can see we've taken this cartoon character and given it just a little bit something else, right? As far as the hair that's in there. I would go around and kind of try to stylize this. I think one thing I would probably do at the very beginning, we left the hair at the default length, as far as the guides, of 100. So if I were to shorten that, in fact, you know what? I'm wondering what it will do. Let's find out. If I just change the length here, will it just make it 25? So it still kept basically the styling that I had before. Right? So that's kind of nice. And maybe what I'll do is come back here. Now that I've given it this kind of shorter look, now I can go back to the brush tool, and I'm going to turn it back to scale. And let's grow some of this right in the middle. And maybe holding down this, I'm going to shrink some of it in the back. In fact, I don't want to see it maybe in the back. Okay, let's see what this looks like. Is it just a quick... Okay, I'm liking that better. Yeah. Again, in the material, we can use the taper here. I can go back to, let's change the length a little bit so that it has some variation. You could load textures in here and things like that if you wanted to. Is there anything else I want to turn on a little bit? All right, last thing, I'm going to go into the color, and let's make this a little darker. And the specular, I'm not sure how the sharpness works. Oh, the secondary one. This one I need to turn down as well. I think that's the thing I was looking for. Okay, so let's do a full quality render. Okay, so that's going to be the end of it. Let's just recap. You need to create a hair helmet one way or the other. If you've built your character using the volume mesher approach, then absolutely you should be able to turn around and use the remesh tool to get kind of a low resolution helmet, right, where you can spawn the hair. So with that object active, you'll create the hair object. The hair object has its settings. Remember the difference between guides and hairs. And remember, it will auto-generate a hair material, right, that is placed onto the hair object. That's all done for you. And it's under the basic tab where you'll find the various things that you can turn on and off. If you want to do a little bit of that, and then you can use the brush tool or comb or any of those to kind of play with the styling of the hair one way or the other. Okay, 27 minutes, a lot to cover. Hopefully that helps.